Okay, so we've now come up to our second session of the Reimagining Citizenship in South Asia conference. This session is themed belonging. We'll take a minute or so before we formally kick off the proceedings of this panel. In the meantime, if audience members would like to just put into the chat box which city or country they're attending this conference from, that would be very good. So we'll give it another minute or so for folks to put in where they're joining us from. If you were with us in the first session, welcome back. For those joining us fresh, I'm thrilled to welcome you to this second session of our Reimagining Citizenship in South Asia conference today. The conference is being curated by the Reimagining Citizenship Consortium based at the Department of Politics at the University of York and the South Asia Specialist Group of the UK Political Studies Association. I am Indrajit Roy, Senior Lecturer in Global Development Politics at the University of York. I am privileged to convene the Reimagining Citizenship Research Consortium, which aims to chronicle the emergent contentions of citizenship in India in the wake of the controversial Citizenship Amendment Act in December 2019. The consortium is a collaboration of public intellectuals, filmmakers, academics, activists, and poets. It is supported by the Arts and Humanities Research Council of the UK. This second session is titled Belonging, and we have an excellent lineup of speakers from Nepal, Sri Lanka, India, and Pakistan. Thank you so much for joining us, Abeeda, Manjita, Ramesh, and Deepak. We have requested speakers to make their interventions in about 8 to 10 minutes. And the format is to have all 4 presentations one after the other, followed by comments and questions. To chair this second session, we have with us Dr. Ravi Raman. Ravi is member State Planning Board, Government of Kerala. Until recently, he was a senior fellow at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library in Delhi. He was a visiting fellow in Oxford, in Cambridge, and in Manchester for various periods. He is also an honorary research fellow at the Department of Development Studies and SOAS, London, and affiliated researcher on egalitarianism at the University of Bergen, and a visiting research fellow at the Center for Development Studies in Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. A prolific writer, he has published several books and journal articles. I would now request Ravi to take over the proceedings, please. Ravi, over to you.
Thanks, Dr. Roy. First of all, it's my great pleasure to congratulate the organizers of this conference. I mean, Dr. Roy and his colleagues, and also the Department of Politics at York University, for taking on the most relevant issue of the day. We live in a very critical period in history where questions of citizenship have been heatedly debated, contested, and challenged. And I'm sure the last session went well, and in fact, it was so rich in terms of presentation and floor level discussion. So I'm sure that the second session would also be along those lines. The sub-theme, that is belonging, we all know is a very, very complex issue, especially when we situate it in the larger context of reimagining citizenship. Often the question of belonging is raised with the question, what is called belonging to whom, or belonging to what, belonging to a community, caste, state, nation, country, or what sort of belonging that we aspire ourselves. So it's a very, very complex question, but we, in this context, preferably raise it as a political question. That is belonging to a political sort of a domain, in what way that we could understand ourselves or the communities that we engage with. How do we understand the what is called political access or the day-to-day life in terms of the citizenship and so on? So basically, I mean, whole lot of questions may come up. I mean, it could be in terms of the technologies adopted by the sovereign power or the state. I mean, to make certain communities more closer to the state and some other communities alien to the state. Or it could be in the form of, say, sort of what is called in terms of institutions, say, for instance. Sometimes you may not have the right kind of access to certain kinds of institutions or certain kinds of positions. Or it could be explained in terms of power relations. I mean, power relations playing in politics to marginalize certain communities, or say, as in the case of what is called first session, it could also be in the form of making certain communities more powerful, as in the case of Hindu in India under Modi. So there could be several such questions, and I'm sure that the learned scholars here would make their presentations on some of these issues. And we have 4 papers. Unlike my friend Harshmandar, I'm not that liberal, so I would be very strict in following the timing. And our speakers can take maximum 8 to 10 minutes. Once it is around 8 minutes, I would show my paper that it is time up. So you might have to wind up in another 2 minutes. We have 4 speakers I have already mentioned. We have Abeeda Qureshi with us, and then we have Deepak Thapa and Manjita Devi, and also Ramesh Ramasamy. I mean, Abeeda Qureshi is from Forman Christian College University, Lahore, Pakistan, and she would be making a presentation on reconstructing citizenship in Islam, an analysis of the status of minorities in Pakistan. And then we have Deepak Thapa from Social Science Baha, Kathmandu, Nepal. He would speak on belonging in Nepal's newly formed provinces. Then we would invite Manjita Devi from Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. And she's going to speak on what's in a name, the role of proper names in the NRC process in India. And then we have Ramesh Ramasamy from University of Peradeniya, Sri Lanka. He would speak on diminished citizenship, struggle continues for a meaningful social citizenship. After all presentations are over, this will be open for the floor. We'll have questions, clarifications, and sometimes I may raise some of my clarifications or questions. So may I request Abeeda Qureshi for your presentation. Over to you, Abeeda, please.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. Will it be possible to share my screen, please?
Yes, please.
But when I say another screen pop-ups, so
are you not able to share the screen?
yes.
So
it says that all panelists can share, but when I click on share screen, it again comes up. So what I'm supposed to do?
Fine, but can you please check once again?
So when I click on share screen, that screen comes up again, which says who can share, only host or all panelists. It says all panelists.
Yeah, and then you select your screen, double click on your screen, and then it should be fine. Or you select your screen and then you will see another button down on your right hand side, say share.
Yes,
or else you can do it, if you can quickly send your presentation directly to me, I can share the screen here while you're presenting.
So it's not possible from here. I don't know what happened. Just a second.
Sure.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, great.
Oh, okay, great, that's fine. Okay, hello everyone. Greetings from Lahore, Pakistan. I am Dr. Abeeda Qureshi, Assistant Professor, as mentioned by Mr. Ravi Raman. And today, the topic of my presentation is Reconstructing Citizenship in Islam, an analysis of minorities in Pakistan. First, I'm going to present traditional understanding of citizenship in Islam and then alternative understanding. Then I'll be looking into Pakistan as a case study and then my concluding remarks. As we all know, just let me put it down. Okay, as we know, the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban and the announcement of establishing an Islamic emirate based on Sharia laws and the anticipated domino effects on Pakistan and other neighboring countries have raised concerns about the citizenship status of non-Muslims in an Islamic emirate. The question that I'll be looking into, what kind of citizenship status does an Islamic state accord to its non-Muslim minorities? What is the traditional understanding? What is the alternative understanding? And where does Pakistan stand when it comes to the status of minorities in Islam? As far as the traditional understanding is concerned, or dominant understanding is concerned, in Islam, in Islamic state, the non-Muslims enjoy complete freedom to practice religion, mode of life, culture, and religious education. They shall be entitled to have their matters concerning personal law administered in accordance with their own religious code, usages, and customs. Islam enforces only its laws of the land on them and gives them equal rights with Muslims in all civil matters. However, it is argued that they will not be considered for sensitive administrative and security positions. This historical understanding or traditional understanding is derived from the practices during the early period of Islamic history, the punishment meted out to non-Muslims by the Prophet, peace be upon him, the status of protected minorities given to the non-Muslims of the conquered land in exchange for payment of jizya, and the fact that there was not a single Muslim appointed as a member of any, or at security level or as on sensitive security position or administrative positions during the early period of Islamic history. This led to the rationale for this was given by a renowned Islamic scholar, Abul Ala Maududi, who argued that Islam has come to dominate ideologically, culturally, and politically, and the true follower of the message have a duty to play a role in ensuring that ideal is realized. The text of Quran, many verses from Quran were referred by Maulana Sahab. One of the verses, he has ordained for you of religion what he enjoined upon Nuh, and that which we have revealed to you, Muhammad, and what we enjoined upon Ibrahim and Moses and Jesus to establish the religion, or Arabic word Ikamat-e-Din. Here the word Ikamat-e-Din is translated by Maulana Sahab as establishing the Sharia in your respective country and then extending it to other countries. And he was of the view that it is binding on each and every Muslim to strive for the ideal. There are other verses in Quran which were referred to declare that there cannot be any truce between Islam and Kufr because there is an inherent discordance between the two. Since an Islamic state is based on ideology, only Muslims who believe in the ideology can be entrusted with the responsibility to run the affairs of the state or could be entitled to an equal citizenship. Non-Muslims may be allowed to participate in the legitimate legislative assembly on the condition that this does not affect adversely the ideological basis of an Islamic state. The Islamic state, therefore, is not defined by national boundaries, but by its membership of the Muslims. This is constitutes the Darul Islam. National boundaries, and indeed nationalism, is a Western construct and colonial construct, and therefore has no place in Islam. This understanding is a dominant understanding throughout the Muslim world, I would say. Popular ideologue like Maulana Maududi, Dr. Israr, and Sayyid Qutb had the similar views. But there is an alternative understanding. What this alternative understanding about citizenship is, Maulana Wahiduddin of India, a very famous religious scholar, contested this understanding and argued that when the deen is interpreted in terms of assumed primacy of a single factor, such as politics, then every aspect of the deen comes to be wrongly seen as being underpinned by politics. He referred to the same verse, which I have explained earlier, argued that the verse makes it clear that it is a commandment about the establishment of the very same deen that was revealed to all prophets from the Prophet Nuh to Prophet Muhammad. Thus, Iqamat-e-Deen does not mean establishing the entire Sharia system, but rather as adopting fully that part of the deen that is incumbent on every Muslim in all circumstances, fully abiding by which a Muslim becomes a true believer. This does not mean, however, Maulana Wahiduddin argues that besides the central basic teaching of Islam or religion, the establishment of social and civilizational laws of the Sharia is not an important issue, but according to him, the establishment has not been made incumbent on us in the absolute sense that proponents of the political interpretation of Islam understand it to be. Speaking in a similar vein, another or two most distinguished scholars, religious scholars from Pakistan, Amin Ahsan Islahi and Javed Ahmad Ghamdi, coined a new terminology which is called Ihtimam-e-Hujja, which is establishment of the conclusive argument. He argued that the punishment meted out to non-Muslim by the Prophet was a divine punishment for those who knowingly rejected the truth and Prophet after it was established conclusively, and there was no doubt left of the truth of the assertion in the minds of the addresses inflicted on them. Javed Ahmad Ghamdi argued that the rules mentioned in Surah Tawbah are time-specific, which are quite hostile towards non-Muslim, as well as place-specific. They are applicable only to immediate addresses of the Messenger of God, and around the Arabian Peninsula, Muslim practices down the centuries have demonstrated this understanding of religion. Ghamdi further argued and elaborates the types of state which we have yet emerged have seen are primarily three. The first state founded in Arabian Peninsula by divine decree. If for such a state it is said that its religion is Islam and only Islam shall reign in it, it cannot be objected to. A similar status was given to Palestine for centuries. Second state, according to him, was the state whose boundaries were determined by the conqueror. And we have seen in the history, the empires. In such states, the religion of the royal family or of the ruler would be considered as the religion of the state. Third type of state, he argues, is a nation state of modern era whose boundaries are ascertained by international treaties and which become a source of nationhood themselves for their citizens as soon as they come into existence. Thus, in spite of having of diversity in color, ancestry, language, and culture, they call themselves Egyptian, American, Afghanis, and Pakistanis, and express the nationhood in this respect. In such states, minorities will have equal citizenship status. He argues that such states cannot have a religion. However, Islam addresses the ruler of the society. If they are Muslim, they are real addresses of the Islam's directive related to collectivity. Pakistan falls in the third category. Non-Muslims have remained the inhabitant of this land for centuries, just as this land belongs to Muslims. It also belongs to non-Muslims. According to their understanding, they're entitled to have equal citizenship status. This is actually the evidence of the same fact which was the founder of Pakistan, Quaid-e-Azam, had explained in his address while addressing the first Constituent Assembly of Pakistan, 11th August 1947. The Constitution of Pakistan, however, fully guarantees that all citizens are equal before law and are entitled to equal protection of law. Article 5 provides that adequate provision shall be made for the minorities to freely profess and practice the religion and develop their cultures. However, Article 41.2 and 91.3 stipulates that only Muslims can become or can assume the highest office of president or prime minister in this country. This contradiction in the constitution is basically or primarily the manifestation of the dominant theological view that I have discussed in this presentation. Also, that in many cases, and there are a number of research on this, apart from theologically motivated discrimination, in many recent research on the topic have suggested that traumatic experience that minorities in Pakistan face are not limited to religious minorities, but are also shared by many Pakistani citizens due to increasingly falling legal system and absence of the rule of law. My concluding remarks are, it is imperative that Muslim political scholars understand the world beyond the traditional understanding of House of Islam and House of War, and ruler and the ruled, which have lost its relevance in the contemporary world where people's right of self-determination has been accepted and international laws, treaties, and organizations determine the relationship of states with one another, as well as towards the other minorities. This need the reconstruction of religious thought, as said by Dr. Muhammad Iqbal, the poet philosopher of Pakistan. That's all from my side. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to express myself. Thank you so much.
Oh, many thanks, Abeeda. I mean, thank you so much for keeping time, you know. That's great. I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, I'm sure that you'll get a whole lot of questions, or rather, we may seek some clarifications at a later stage. Thank you again. And now may I invite Deepak Thapa, Social Science, Baha, Kathmandu, Nepal, who is going to make a presentation on belonging in Nepal's newly performed provinces. Over to you, Thapa.
Thank you, Ravi. Let me share my screen. Okay. At the outset, I'd like to thank. How does one do this? Slideshow. There you are. Okay. Want to thank both Indrajit and Buddha for this invitation to discuss some ideas on belonging and the provinces we've formed for the past 5 years now. When we talk about the federal structure in Nepal that began with the adoption of the 2015 constitution, the idea of provinces itself resonates very strongly with the concept of belonging, because belonging was a way in which the various population groups in Nepal felt able to identify with the state. Nepal is a country of minorities. The largest group is only 16%. And of course, like as in every country, there are dominant groups and there are the subjugated ones. So the dominant groups number around 30% of the population. The rest of the 70% are what we might call the subordinate groups. So just to give you a short timeline, because this is more about federalism and the provinces that were formed around that. We find that in the 1950s, the federalism was demanded for the first time. In 1990, there was a popular movement against the monarchy that ruled the country until then. And the demands for federalism again made its way into the mainstream. But nothing came of it. And then in 1996, we had an insurgency that began with the Maoist party taking up arms against the state. That was followed by, in 2002, even as the insurgency continued, the king took power by dismissing the prime minister. And in 2006, the political parties that were ousted came together with the Maoists to launch a popular movement again against the king, which was successful. As a result of which, the idea of inclusion, because among the ideas that began circulating after the Maoists' insurgency began was to find ways in which to contain the Maoist movement. And the idea of inclusion was very much strongly in the popular imagination. So with the ouster of the king and the political parties and the Maoists coming together, the idea of inclusion was articulated in various ways. And one of them was through the interim constitution, where it was clearly mentioned that the constitution to be framed later would be fully inclusive. But they missed out on something. They forgot to mention, or it was deliberate, or it was probably deliberate, the idea of federalism was not mentioned. Because federalism and inclusion, they go hand in hand in the part of the popular discourse in Nepal. Because federalism was seen as a way of making the state more inclusive by dividing up the state in various forms and ensuring that governance is closer to the people. In any case, there was a civic unrest that lasted, somewhat violent civic unrest. And as a result, federalism was mentioned in the interim constitution itself, with the proviso that the Constituent Assembly would decide on the contours of federalism to be adopted in Nepal. And accordingly, in 2008, we had the election to a Constituent Assembly, which would, in the next 2 years, frame the constitution. It did not happen. It lasted for 4 years. And the main contention was around how federalism would be unfolded in Nepal. So after 4 years, we had to go for another election. So we had another one in 2013. And that too was leading towards some kind of a deadlock before the earthquake happened in Nepal, as a result of which the political parties managed to come together and in a very rushed manner adopt a constitution in 2015. And under the new constitution, we had the elections to all three levels: first the local levels, and then the provincial levels, and then the federal level. And this gentleman, K.P. Sharma Oli of the Communist Party of Nepal, Unified Marxist-Leninists, became the first prime minister under the new constitution. And he was given the mandate to implement federalism, which is ironical because he was among the most vocal critics of the federal structure itself. But politics being what it is, he was given the responsibility of unrolling that, and as a result of which we are facing many problems we have. The next, I'm going to show you a series of slides to show how the federalism discourse in terms of the identity movement unfolded over the course of some decades. So this was the first demand for federalism that came in the 1950s. It was mentioned by a party that was based in this lower part of Nepal, which we call the Tarai, and which is populated by a group that in Nepal are called, mainly populated by a group called the Madhesis, who are akin to the people from mainly Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, because obviously the state boundaries came much later than the residents of the people. There are, of course, a number of immigrants over the centuries that have moved in from Uttar Pradesh and Bihar to these parts, but then there were a lot of indigenous Madhesis also in those areas. And being sidelined over the centuries, in the 1950s itself, the Nepal Tarai Congress, which represented, or claimed to represent at least, people from that area, demanded that Nepal this area be declared a separate province or a separate state. So nothing came of it. The main leader of that party was co-opted by the establishment at that time, and that died a quiet death. And in 1990, after the end of the monarchical system, we saw the demand for federalism rise again raised by a party based in the Tarai. And this is the concept of federalism that they had at that time, whereby you have two provinces in the Tarai in the south, and then 3 provinces in the north, which is also interesting because it assumes a certain kind of homogeneity for the people living in the northern parts. It not only assumes, but also reflects certain ignorance of the people who are making these demands of, how heterogeneous the people in the north are as well. Anyway, then, in the late 1990s, with the Maoist insurgency going full swing, demands for federalism also began, and then proposals also came. And this was among the first of the proposals that was made by a public intellectual on how we could possibly divide up the country into a federal state. And this reflects the what you might call the homelands of some of the major groups of the country. We have somewhere in the range of 100 plus ethnic groups in Nepal. So this represents only some of the major ones. And then the Maoists, which were still in the insurgency, also came up with their own proposal of this is how we should divide up Nepal. And then during the election to the Constituent Assembly in 2008, the Maoists came up with another proposal, which is similar to the previous one, but somewhat more elaborate. And again, like you see the division of the states that had been proposed, again, reflecting the various groups. These names that you see here, except for the ones on the far left, Mahakali and Bheri Karnali, all the others reflect the toponyms, reflect the names of the major groups living in that area. Again, like I said, they do not form a majority in any of the areas because we are a very mixed society as well, and it is very heterogeneous at the same time. At the same time, there were a lot of competing proposals made by everyone got into the game and saying, no, this is the way you should divide up the country. So this vision is from one of the most accomplished geographers of Nepal. So this is how he said we should divide up Nepal. Again, there is a reflection of the various groups mentioned in this as well. And then you had small groups who also came up with their own idea of how they should divide up Nepal. Just like as I mentioned in the earlier part, where people from the Tarai did not care about the rest of the country, but only about how the new federal state should reflect their own concerns. So you have the Magar ethnic group, this is how it's almost like East and West Pakistan. So you would have a Magarat autonomous region, which was spread across two different parts of Nepal. And then just in contrast, this is a small group, a very tiny group, numbering a few thousand, called the Chepang, who live around the capital region. And they said they want an autonomous region reflecting that. They don't care about what happens to the rest of the country. Just to give an example of where the discourse lay. And then you had, of course, the people from the parties from the Tarai said, okay, what we want is something at the bottom reflecting our population. And then, the hills and the mountains, you can have them, one province for the hills and one province for the mountains. And then you have the dominant groups who are spread across Nepal and who generally, thank you, do not have the kind of what you might call a homeland. So these are the people, again, who are advocating for what you might call a geographic division of the country. So which division that does not reflect any of the ethnic states. This was the Constituent Assembly. The Committee for the Restructuring of the State came up with this idea, which again reflects the population groups. The political parties could not agree, so they formed a state restructuring committee, which came up with a similar idea, but also a splinter group of the same commission came up with another idea, which again does not reflect ethnicity, but more geography. And this was more or less what was adopted by the Constituent Assembly in 2015. And this is the form of the federal Nepal that you have right now. It does not reflect any kind of ethnic or identity assertion on the part of any group, but is more based on geography, except for what you might call Province 2, where the Madhesi groups have been locked in. The federal structure is thus, we have 3 tiers, federal, provincial, 7 provinces, and 53 local governments. The division of power is given as such. We have concurrent federal and provincial powers and concurrent federal, provincial, and local powers. But what is missing is concurrent provincial and local powers. All the residual powers remain with the state, with the federal level. In terms of practice, the local governments have been given a lot more power than the provincial governments, because this is viewed as a way in which the provinces could be undercut in terms of their authority. But at the same time, the local governments are also being undercut in various ways. We used to have 75 districts during the restructuring process. It was made into 77 districts. And although the districts are not recognized in the constitution, in nowhere the districts are recognized, we have 77 district coordination committees, which is basically a way of what you might call patronage dispensing to political party leaders. They're supposed to play the coordination role between the various local governments in the district. But the more worrisome part is that the administrative structure still follows the district model. So you have the district administrative office, which is responsible, which is the most powerful office in the district, which is still existing. The district police office, which is under the district administrative office, and then the district revenue office. These are just examples of some of the residues from the previous system that has remained intact. On the positive side, because the federalism issue has been more or less settled, although it has not quite, and I'll explain the next slide. Inclusion has been is seen as non-threatening nowadays, and there is more of an public discourse which has begun to take the idea of inclusion much more seriously, because inclusion is not linked to the idea of ethnic provinces. Everything is not right with the Constitution. As you can see, we had one amendment to the Constitution in January 2016, just a few months after the Constitution is adopted, whereby two changes were made. The points highlighted. There was some kind of affirmative action to be implemented by the state, which is to be done on the principle of inclusion. That was changed to principle of proportional inclusion, which means that everything would be in proportion to the population. And also, when the constituencies would be divided up, the consideration would shift from geography and population to population and geography. So population are the people being made center stage, although in practice that has not really happened. The federalism idea, as I mentioned, is still very strong in terms of identity. This is the demand from the 50s, just to refresh your memory. And as a result of which, we find that 4 years after the adoption of the constitution and the division of the country into 7 provinces, 2 of the provinces have still not been able to decide on a name. That is mainly because I'm almost on this last slide. This is mainly because the provincial assemblies have not been able to decide whether they would go with geographic features as they have done in the remaining 5 provinces, as you can see in the legend. These are geographical features. In province 1 and 2, they have not been able to decide whether they would like to go for, they should go for geographical features, which is what the dominant groups want. But the ethnic groups, which are also pretty much strong in the provincial assemblies in those 2 provinces, want to assert some kind of ethnic name on the provinces. And as a result of which, 4 years later, we still don't have a name for 2 of the 7 provinces. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deepak. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. I'm sure that we'll have a whole lot of questions, because Nepal, we all know that it's a very, very difficult, very different terrain, very landscape of struggles, politics, and all sort of things. So we'll come back to you. And now, may I invite Manjita Devi. Manjita is from Institute of Technology, Bombay. She's going to speak on what's in a name, the role of proper names in the NRC process. Over to you, Manjita.
Hello, thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen.
Yes, please.
So my name is Manjita, and so the title of my project is What's in a Name? The Role of Proper Names in NRC Process. So I'll be talking about one particular Muslim community settled in the river islands in Western Assam. And this paper has evolved out of an ethnographic study for my doctoral research project over a period of 8 months. So before I dive into the study, a brief history of the community that I have been working with. So they are the descendants of East Bengal origin Muslims, and because their legacy has been so troubled, a historical legacy, that it is we cannot go and talk about the contemporary issues without briefly talking about what has happened before. So, the descendants of East Bengal origin Muslims have had a troubled legacy in Assam. So they first migrated they were brought to Assam by the colonial government for demands of colonial industrial expansion. But it was the same government which passed restrictive schemes to put a stop, to curb their migratory process, and because it was believed that they were threatening, the increase in population was threatening the Assamese society. And but it was the restrictive schemes that were there were very unique in nature, because it was only for the East Bengal, the descendants of East Bengal origin Muslims, and just because they were culturally and ethnically different from the Assamese society, even if legally they might have at that point of time formed a part of the Indian Empire under the British rule. So, during the time of partition, the migration issue became a political issue. And in the post-independence period, there have been attempts made by the entire community to assimilate themselves into Assamese society by identifying themselves with the Assamese language, which has led to Assamese speakers getting exponentially increased, and Assamese became the state language. But however, what has happened is that, and they have also opened schools and Assamese schools and colleges in their local areas. But what has happened over the years is that presently, if we see that that a lot of labelings are used, for the descendants of East Bengal origin Muslims. So the dominant political discourse is such that they are called as threats, unwanted aliens, land-hungry peasants, and it is usually because, firstly, because of the fertility. They hold this fertility rate narrative, which when people mistake. There's always people think that the rise in population is because of like people from other sides of the border are coming to India. And there are also reasons such as displacement. The river islands that I'm talking about are very fragile land, and they are constantly erosion. People are getting displaced, as we yesterday also we have seen what is happening. So here I'm not arguing that whether or not they're illegal immigrants in Assam, but what has happened is that most of the arguments as to what is the number of the illegal migrants that are there have been more or less been a guesswork. And because of that, what is happening is that the descendants of East Bengal origin Muslims who have been settled in Assam for over generations, they have been subjected to surveillance, and many are routinely profiled, not only by lawmakers, by media houses, but not only by lawmakers, but also by media houses, by youth groups who round up quote unquote suspected illegal Bangladeshis and hand them over to the police. And generalizations are also made about how they take part in politics, engage in politics, which is the vote bank politics template is often used and it is often used as a political tool by vested interests to mobilize votes. So this is the reason that the idea of updating National Register of Citizens, the exercise of identifying and registering genuine citizens, garnered mass support from the people of the state of Assam, with its promise to identify the illegal migrants from Bangladesh. Even if the critics have argued that NRC is not an easy encapsulated exercise of merely identifying and registering genuine citizens, and a minor glitch or absurdity can put an individual in detention camp, or worse, can render them stateless. The proponents have supported NRC based on the logic that it will bring about a closure to the long-standing atmosphere of suspicion. So the research questions are, is that in this paper, I'll present the findings of an ethnographic study of a displaced riverine community as they undertake the journey of ascertaining their citizenship. I attempt to understand the struggle with official names that the people had to undergo in the process of making it to the final list of NRC. So I would be presenting mostly narratives from the field, and exploring the social location. So the community that I'm talking about has faced displacement, loss of land due to erosion and floods. The Char Island, in which they are settled, have no motorable roads. They are only dirt roads, no drinking water. Childbirth is still taking place at home without any medical supervision. And the only way that a person who might need urgent medical attention can be taken outside the river island is on a motorbike, which is taken to the river bank, and from where they have to be taken on a boat. So it doesn't matter how serious a patient is, this is the only means of conveyance. And even motorbikes is a luxury that only few families have. So even looking at how the structural condition of the village is, it's very important to see. It's very thought-provoking to see that this community has a historical and contemporary experience of maintaining and producing legal documents as a form of identification, and this was even before NRC. So the present NRC, they are vigilant with identity documents and papers. And I will here I have shared two excerpts from my field study. You'll see that Alam, a teacher of ME school, talks about identity papers and documents, and he says that papers have been part of our lives. So when our forefathers came, they were given family ticket by the British, and they have kept it. Even the cows that were sold in the pre-British period, we still have the receipt for it. And again, Adin shares that you will find old receipts with families from the time of British. So here he says something very important. The concept of maintaining papers have always been there in our community, but it is only now that we are understanding the importance of it. So observations of my own observations from the field, from my analytic memos that I have written, of all the possessions that the village people keep in their house, the most valuable thing that they own remains their proof of identity. I visited one particular house which seemed like an ordinary house from outside, but in this one-room house contained what Iqbal, a 50-something man, considered his most valuable possession. I sat on the bed, stared around the room blankly. Iqbal offered me some water and took out a key to open the drawer in a wooden table at the end of the room. I expected him to take out some photos, but instead he opened the drawer to take out another key to open the showcase on the other side of the room. He then took out a few pieces of paper from the drawer, which were neatly put in the plastic folder, and handed it to me. They were not ordinary documents. His whole life revolved around those documents, which were from as early as 1951, which proved Iqbal's right to live in Assam as any other citizen. So what I'm trying to say is that the community has been always, vigilant about legal documents. And in spite of this, when the NRC process started, what they did not understand was the power of proper names, like how names have a decisive power and assume an identity in itself. So the community that I'm referring to, nicknames form a very integral part of their life, their social life. And so for other people who are not from India, so nicknames are basically substitutes for given names, but they are not official names. And it usually implies great sense of intimacy and closeness. But they're embedded in Indian culture. Like even if you see the politicians and actors in India are, fondly addressed with nicknames like Amma, mother, was used for the former chief minister of Tamil Nadu, Devi for the current, which means sister, for the current chief minister of West Bengal, and more recently Mama, meaning uncle, is used to address the newly appointed chief minister of Assam. And and what he's fondly addressed as was one of the questions recently asked in the Indian version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. So it depicts how, you know, nicknames are a part of Indian culture. So in my field study, I found that nicknames give a sense of personal identity. Not only gives a sense of personal identity, but it gives a sense of social identity, and social identity, especially for women whose entire social identity is limited to the village. So nickname is also amplifies some incidents that have taken place in their life, which is of particular significance. So, however, it is seen that in the community, the proper names are seen as names which form a part of public life. It is rarely a part of everyday interactions. For women and elderly who have not been part of any institution, such as, you know, going to a school or even been to the city, for them it is an uphill struggle, you know, with proper names. Also, there are taboos on, you know, for women on saying names of various categories, such as names of affinal kings, like uttering names of their husband or in-laws or anyone older in the woman's in-laws house. So this is also considered a taboo. So many a times women herself is addressed in the form of some of her relational name. So to understand that how women are not used to using proper names in their daily life. But what NRC did was that people were thrown into this whirlwind of events where knowledge and understanding of proper names became supreme. Where if there was a minor error, people faced the risk of losing not only their names, but their identity as well. Through few narratives, sorry.
Sorry for interruption. Please take maximum 1 or 2 minutes.
Yes. So I want to quickly share 2 narratives. I'll just share. So here, Joynal is talking about how some, you know, so many nicknames have come to the first, you know, NRC list. So he's saying that people are uneducated here and have never seen the world outside. But there are no Bangladeshis here. And then I want to specifically take you here where they are saying that finding proper names of places in legacy data. So you'll see that on the left-hand side, like in the screenshot, it's a place. It's written Poeshti Chalakura. So Poeshti in the local Bhatia, Bengali Bhatia language, it means new. So this village was newly formed, and you know, like so what happened is that the river islands for some years it goes into because the river keeps changing its course. For some years it goes into the water and it again comes out. So Poeshti was some, you know, Poeshti means new place. So on the site you'll see that there's Chalakura Char. So it was the original place. So I will just share one narrative where you can say that you know, the person is saying you cannot imagine what kind of harassment we have gone through to bring out the legacy data. So for legacy data, one needs to know the name of father-grandfather village. The current village was formed in the early 1960s after the entire village shifted from one place to another. So now my family members and I are educated, so we know the exact name of the village we previously stayed in. But what about those who are uneducated people? And what about those whose family elders must have passed away? So how would they find the name which, you know, which their ancestors, their family must have, you know, shifted from back in 1960s or 70s? So yeah, so next is vernacularization of names, how, you know, pronunciation have caused people a few problems. So, you know, the woman is shared like how she has shared that her name was Saleja, but it came as Chaleja. So she's just speaking, so she's asking if there is just one particular accent that you have to, you know, use even in NRC documents. And concluding remarks is the internalization of power of proper names. So people understood that, you know, proper names are a rigid signifier. So I had a conversation with Saidul, in whose house for all the months I was staying. So he introduced me his newly born nephew. He asked me, he told the baby 6 weeks, like 8 months, he was saying that Noor Alam, meet my Apu, my sister. And I asked him, I told him it's a unique way of addressing his own nephew by referring to the first name and the last name. And what he said to me was that NRC has taught him that there should not be any nickname. No one in the household or even relatives are allowed to use any other name for the child. And secondly, you know, I want to talk about the focus on formal education, how people have understood, you know, like education is not only about securing jobs or doing masonry work, but education is necessary for survival, for their assertion and for identity, and it is also a responsibility. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Manjita. Thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. Yeah, it's true that at least I may raise a couple of clarifications at a later stage. I'm sure that other colleagues also may want to ask you questions. Now, let me come to Mr. Ramesh Ramasamy. Ramasamy is from University of Peradeniya, Sri Lanka. He works on plantations. And the title of his presentation is Diminished Citizenship. Struggle continues for a meaningful social citizenship. Over to you, Ramesh.
Yeah, thank you very much, the chairperson. And I hope you can see my PowerPoint. So first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for this wonderful and timely conference. My presentation is basically about one particular ethnic group in Sri Lanka, minority ethnic group in Sri Lanka, who are known as Indian Tamils or plantation Tamils in Sri Lanka. They came to Sri Lanka during the British colonial period to work on the newly introduced tea, coffee, and rubber plantations. So I will be looking at the current status of their social citizenship in the current context, and also some of the challenges that they encounter when accessing governance institutions or public services in Sri Lanka. So when we look at some of these existing literature on say citizenship, actually it very clearly indicates that the legal form of citizenship is more likely to improve social rights. And also there are some other scholars argue that the legal form of citizenship is more likely to improve socio-economic and political rights of marginalized groups, and also it enhances the democratic citizenship and the relationship between state and the citizen. And Marshall, actually, as we all know, that Marshall very clearly underscores the importance of social citizenship to become a complete citizen in any society. And also the social citizenship enables individuals belonging to disadvantaged communities to access legally mandated public services. So this study is basically looking at the social citizenship, the problem of social citizenship from the governance point of view or institutional point of view, taking some empirical evidence in the Sri Lankan context. And actually, in the case of Sri Lanka, it is the legacy of statelessness remains larger part of Sri Lanka's post-colonial history. The Indian Tamils actually accounts to 1.5 million in the total population of Sri Lanka. And so they were deprived of citizenship in 1948, shortly after the Sri Lanka's independence. And the long-standing problem of citizenship actually resolved in 2003 with a special act passed in the parliament. But this long-standing structural discrimination in the wake of deprivation of citizenship rights led to large-scale exclusions in all forms of governance structure in Sri Lanka, in which, if you look at these discriminations in the entire process, the nationality or the identity or their status of citizenship was a central feature of all this discriminatory process. So they were distanced from the state institutions completely, the entire community, and they were left out from the state institution, which created the conditions to be governed by the privatized plantation companies. Because in Sri Lanka, even in India, the tea plantations, rubber plantations are being managed by private companies, private plantation companies. So they, govern this community for roughly for 2 centuries. So this actually puts them into unequal citizens or second-class citizens in Sri Lanka. even after resolving this citizenship problem. And these are the research questions that I would like to answer. In which ways did the legal citizenship influence access to mandated public services? And how do institutional factors, the governance factors, influence access to public services and social rights? And why is quality of government important to marginalized communities to access legally mandated public services? And actually, I used two theoretical standpoints. Basically, one is from the social citizenship ideas, a quality of government idea, basically, developed by two Swedish scholars, Rothstein and Terrell. They are arguing that impartiality and fairness of public institutions are key, vitally important in exercising public power. So they need to adhere to these two important principles when they are exercising public power in implementing policies and programs. So high quality of government increases the quality of public institutions as well as the public services. So which is very important for marginalized communities to access public services as rightful citizens of the country. When the public institutions are weak, poor, and when there is low quality of public institutions, then the marginalized communities or the excluded communities will be encountering serious challenges in accessing public services. So this is a kind of quick theoretical standpoints, and this is largely a qualitative research. I am presenting some key findings of a larger project on citizenship and quality of governance in Sri Lanka, which is funded by NORAD. And so I am only presenting the qualitative observations in this presentation. This is an ongoing study. So now I have come to the major part of this presentation. So I'm looking at basically the link between the nexus between citizenship and the public service. So in the case of plantation Tamils in Sri Lanka, the legal status of citizenship has provided only a kind of symbolic equality, not a substantial equality. So which is less likely to ensure substantial equality in exercising the substantial benefits of legal citizenship. So this is a kind of nominal entitlement for the plantation people. And some laws and policies continuously prevent the substantial benefits of citizenship for this community, because due to the continuation of colonial laws, some of the policies, especially language policy and so on. So therefore, they have limited access to participate in governance institutions due to a diminished form of citizenship, and also due to some discriminatory policies and laws. And there is also, due to these discriminatory policies and laws, there has been a kind of dysfunctional relationship between plantation people and public institutions at the local, subnational, and national level. So unfair policies and practices, ill treatment, and exclusions from governance structures have significantly limited their social capital. This is very important observation in this study, because they do not have access to participate in governance institutions. The space has been largely limited because of this discriminatory treatment, so which actually has diminished their social capital to demand certain public services from the public institutions or from elected officials. So this actually is a problem of lack of civil skills, civic skills, and human capability. And if you read this quote, this is a quote from a respondent who participated in this study. In fact, we all are citizens of Sri Lanka, but I cannot say that our lives have become better after obtaining citizenship. Our life depends on plantation industry, that is they are referring to plantation management, and we do not enjoy the substantial benefits of citizenship rights. I would say it is only nominal citizenship. Our day-to-day life becomes hard as we only depend on limited welfare services. We are still being treated as second-class citizens in the larger framework of governance in this country. So they are electing in the election. They are exercising voting rights in every election. They have elected members in local government and subnational and the central government, but still they are unable to exercise or enjoy public services as rightful citizens of Sri Lanka. And these two elements or principles, I would say, quality of government principles, impartiality and fairness. So this actually has been, these principles have been simply singled out in the public institutions when dealing with plantation people. So ethnicity and language continue to influence the organizational citizenship behavior and institutional practices. As even in one of the previous presentations, Indrajit was talking about ethnocracy. So even in Sri Lanka, we can clearly observe the influence of ethnocracy in the public institutions and they are working. And monolingual institutional cultural and practices are visible in the public institution. So in Sri Lanka, Sinhalese language is the dominant language in the working of public institutions, but there are some constitutional arrangements to enable minority language to be used in the public institutions in everyday transactions. But in practice, these minority languages have been largely denied or ignored in the public institutions. They have been fostering the monolingual ideas in the public institutions when they are delivering or dealing with marginalized people like plantation community. That again singles out the plantation people from enjoying public services. So language. So again, so discrimination, the continuous discrimination from all forms of governance institutions have pushed this community to put forth demands for state reforms in Sri Lanka. Now they are demanding reforms, state reforms or governance reforms from the point that they are an excluded ethnic minority in this country and they are continuously suffering or experiencing discriminations in the governance institutions. Therefore, they are demanding separate institutional setup, governance setup at the local level to exercise and enjoy public services as rightful citizens. So there is also lack of trust among plantation people over public institution. This appears to have closely linked with lack of multicultural organization practices and lack of inclusive citizenship. And also the study reveals that there is a mismatch between the constitutional guarantee that establishes the legal status of citizenship and the actual rights that the plantation, in case some of the previous presenters highlighted this issue even in Indian context. So this study confirms that institutional structure, yes, I will finish it. So institutional practices, rules and regulations are more likely to induce exclusion. At the same time, it is also possible to, they are also more likely to promote inclusion in the Sri Lankan context. So the formal citizenship status is unlikely to end the institutionalized discrimination and lifetime exclusion experienced by the formerly stateless people, which is not only the case in Sri Lanka, even in other parts of South Asian countries. So I have come to conclusion. So low quality of public institutions and unfair working have resulted in poor subjective human well-being and fragile social citizenship. So low quality of government have also resulted in discriminations in governance structures, ill treatment, lack of social capital, and weak human capability. That addresses the first research question. There are reasons to believe that since the independence, there had been an underclass formation through laws and policies that pave the way for making second-class citizens in Sri Lanka. Institutional variables are more likely to have an impact than the socio-demographic variables in Sri Lanka when it comes to access to public services for the marginalized people. So legal citizenship has redefined their relationship with the state as not outsiders, but as marginalized insiders. So that is the current status of this community. So that is the second research question. Improving the quality of government is more likely to increase the extent of access and service delivery to the plantation community. So there is an increasing concern actually on the output side of democracy than that of input side of democracy. Output side of democracy is largely about impartiality, equality, fair treatment, and so on. So that addresses the third research question. So with that, I stop here. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ramesh. Thank you so much. And now, actually, the floor is open for questions, clarifications, discussions, comments. Before taking this to the floor, as moderator of this session, may I ask a couple of clarifications or questions? Due to the paucity of time, I won't take much time. I mean, coming to the first presentation, Abeeda Qureshi. If you ask me to summarize, I mean, I would say that, look, you are essentially talking about what I would call conditional citizenship in Pakistan. I mean, because it is conditional as far as the non-Muslim subjects are concerned. That's one major point that I have located in your presentation. Another thing that I have located in your presentation is that there are various narratives about Islam. So there is no single narrative, whole lot of narratives. You need to go for the right narrative. Then I found it very interesting to know from your presentation as well as from your abstract that you went for a very rich sort of an elite interview with scholars, religious scholars, experts, legal experts, and others. I mean, in this context, shall I ask just one question that, look, I mean, to what extent that their concerns, I mean, the way in which they articulate their position are brought into the public sphere. I mean, to what extent these issues that they raise have become a part of an internal critique of Islam. You might wonder why I asked this question. I asked this question because of a very specific reason. If you look at the history of religions and the way in which religions are reformed, you would find that the internal critique has played a very critical role. Say, for instance, take the case of liberation theology with respect to Christianity. This has emerged as part of an internal critique. So the first thing that I would ask you is whether the kind of scholars, the legal experts that you have mentioned, have been able to generate this internal critique from within Islam, and to what extent it has been positive or it has been genuinely positive. That is one thing that I thought of asking you. The second thing I thought of asking you is about the external impact on this sort of things. I mean, two sort of external impacts. One is the post-2014 rise of Modi politics in India, and in what way that this has influenced. And the other one, you know well, that you have begun your presentation by saying that, look, takeover of Afghanistan by Taliban has got a domino effect on in Pakistan and like that. So we all know the history, you know, how Taliban and Al-Qaeda have been promoted by American CIA and like that. So the external impact on this sort of discourse and practices, you know, that also deserve some sort of an attention, I think. The third one is, of course, the Dima system that you have mentioned, that to what extent they have been able to respond, you know, in what way that they respond. I mean, what are the forms of the representation, you know, in terms of protests or what is called in terms of memorials or in terms of demonstrations or like that. These are the three things that I thought I would ask you. And then coming to the second presentation, Deepak, I mean, you have made a wonderful presentation. I know that you're a known scholar in Nepal on the issues that you have raised. But one missing link that I have located in your presentation, of course, I have a lot of things to say about Nepal. But for the paucity of time, I would just confine myself to just one missing link. I mean, as part of federalism, you know, people were also discussing whether they want to go for Hinduism or secularism while drafting the constitution. So apart from the debate on federalism, there was also a very, what is called a deeper kind of discussion going on between the two things. Even at one contest, you know, I would remember Prajanta saying that, look, I mean, the word secularism doesn't fit in the larger political domain. I asked this question because of a very specific reason. I mean, you are saying that, look, I mean, the federalism has been finally shaped up. But, you know, that was by and large driven by the interest of dominant communities without taking into account the proportionality argument of the ethnic minorities or linguistic minorities in Nepal. So I would argue that any discussion on federalism would be incomplete unless and until you have a very critical position on this question, that is Hinduism versus secularism, and bringing that essence into the constitution. Only that much at the moment for the time being. Coming to the third paper, Manjita Devi. I mean, since Manjita is a doctoral scholar, I think, and since I'm a teacher, I think I would go for a very different path. I mean, after hearing your presentation, a wonderful presentation. I really liked it. I would like to visit your place one day. But then I was thinking, whether one could enrich this, by bringing two main classic works. One work is by Frantz Fanon, because Fanon talks much about what is called internalization. At one stage, he says that colonialism, internalized the inferiority of indigeneity as far as the indigenous people were concerned. So this internalization of power, the proper power that you mentioned, could easily be explained further by bringing some critical insights from Frantz Fanon. Either you can join him or you can depart from his line of thinking. Apart from Frantz Fanon, I would also request you to have a look at the classic work by Michel Foucault, The Archaeology of Knowledge, 1972 work. He speaks about how documents become a source of power. And in this case, it's so clear that how the Hindutva, the sovereign power, has converted the idea of documentation as a source of power. That's all for the time being. Coming to Ramesh. Yeah, Ramesh, I'm particularly familiar with the case of plantations because I have brought out my book on plantation history of 150 years of history of South Indian plantations. So the plantation Dalits and the structural discrimination that you're talking about, I'm very, very familiar about it. But I would have loved if you could, say a bit more about the economic alternatives that they are thinking about. I mean, it's true that you have beautifully explained the kind of institutional trust that they are building up as a counter narrative. That's fantastic. That's quite interesting. But at the same time, we also wanted to know more about the economic alternatives that they are trying to build up. Why? There is a very specific reason why I raised this point. You know what really happened? The case of Tamil plantation workers. I mean, the work of Rachel Kurian and others. I mean, immediately after nationalization of plantations, I would say that there was a marked difference, immediately after the nationalization of plantations as far as Tamil plantation Dalits were concerned. But now what happened? What's the outcome of that long trajectory of plantation, nationalization of plantation, and denationalization of plantations? So I would allow if you could speak more on that. And also, apart from building up institutional trust and like that, what about their actual forms of protest? I mean, whether there have been any kind of actual protest taking place, in what way that they negotiate with the state in political terms, apart from the sociological sort of understanding, So this politics and economics, let us bring these two things together, the political economy of the plantation domain. One would hear more about that. Thank you so much. So coming back to Abeeda Qureshi, we would like to hear your response. Or you can wait, once other questions also come up from the floor.
Abeeda, we can't hear you. I think you need to unmute.
So Abeeda. So Indrajit,
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So let me move to interesting questions. First, I would like to say that today I have presented the first part of my research in which I have tried to deconstruct the religious narratives that had impacted the constitutional developments in Pakistan. So far, the influence on our constitutional development, as far as this aspect is concerned, was of dominant religious narrative that I explained in my presentation. The traditional understanding of religion, and throughout our constitutional history, there have been a number of provisions that have been included in constitutions to appease or to accommodate religious groups in Pakistan. But lately there has been a sort of debate regarding or in regards to what is this a true understanding of religion as far as the citizenship or minorities, our relations with minorities are concerned. So as far as your question is whether it's generating positive impact, I think it is important that we also bring the alternative narrative to the fore so that we can give a better picture to our audience and they can have a critical understanding of what Islam is about. Because in Islamic country like Pakistan, and Pakistan is a 97.3% Muslim majority area. Minorities are just 3.7%. So religion plays a dominant role here. And without understanding the religious narrative and deconstructing them, we cannot have convince the audience, the masses on the ground, that look, this is the dominant influential understanding of citizenship, but there is another, and we need to deconstruct it. I can understand that the political interpretation of Islam, as was explained by Maududi Sahab and Dr. Israr in Pakistan and Sayyid Qutb followed the same understanding in Middle East, was a reaction to the complete downfall of Muslim world. And then they understood that the only way forward is that we just stand up and we acquire a government and then we get our lost empire back. So this was basically a response to that downfall of Muslim world. But is this the right understanding? Throughout so far, in all our constitutions, this aspect or this narrative dominated the constitution making. Though the people who founded this country, Quaid-e-Azam and his friends in the freedom movement, they were quite liberal in approach towards citizenship. But considering that it's a dominantly a Muslim majority area, it was not possible to neglect those. So in this presentation that today I have made, I have tried to bring other less dominant narratives to the fore, and I have tried to explain what view they have. And so far, apart from the religious theological debates, in our academia, there is no discussion about the alternative narratives who are having very strong argument. As far as external impacts are concerned, that's always happens because somehow we are very closely linked to India for positive and negative reasons both. So whatever happens there somehow create a sort of resentment here if it is negative. But obviously we need to look for the positive things that we can both do. And as far as the Modi's influence, so obviously it's a time of social media and news comes in Pakistan. And then what happens in India under the Hindutva ideology, it also supports the dominant already existing narrative, not the alternative narrative, which talks about equality and equal citizenship. The Hindutva ideology is supporting the dominant traditional understanding of Islam towards the non-Muslim. Now you need to strengthen yourself. Look what they are doing with us. We need to strive for what is our lost glory, and that is only possible by adopting the political interpretation of Islam given by respectable Maududi Sahab, Dr. Israr, and Sayyid Qutb, so that ideology, if it increases in India, ultimately it would strengthen the already dominant influential narrative, religious narrative in Pakistan. So in the end, we all would be going towards an extremism. Afghanistan, the impact in Pakistan, definitely, because Afghanistan is kind of a brotherly country to Pakistan. So if the things happens positively there, if the Afghan Emirates manages to do good things in Afghanistan under the Sharia law, there is possibility that Pakistan would look for it to say, look, they have managed to do it. But if the things that they do are negative in a sense that it's discriminatory, so there is possibility that it would not be appreciated among the masses. But it all depends how this current Taliban government moves on and which direction it goes. So it is too premature to say something about it. But it
Thanks,
would
Abeeda.
definitely have impact on this because we share language with them. Pashtuns are on both sides of the border. We share religion, and they come and go very freely in Pakistan.
Thanks,
Sorry?
Abeeda. Yeah, thanks. We have only 10 minutes left, so thanks. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your wonderful reply. Yeah. Others, please. Only 10 minutes left. Yeah.
Should we do that, or should we take in any questions they might people might have, and then we can do that later?
Yeah.
I think, Deepak, it might be an idea to respond to Ravi, because I think that those sort of it nicely capture some of the thoughts and comments that we might have had. So go for it.
That's fine. Okay. So yeah, I mean, like.
If that is the case, I just wanted to add one sentence. This constitution, your constitution, that came in 2015, and that the Modi government, 2014. So there is so close connection, all of a sudden. Why? That is there is this reinforcement of Hinduism in Nepal. So in connection with that, also, I think we would like you to reflect.
Yes. Well, the reason that I have not mentioned the religion aspect is mainly because although there is a strong undercurrent, which obviously we do not know the extent of, because it has not been mapped. We haven't had any kind of referendum or anything on the issue of religion. But in the entire discussion around the constitution. The question of Hinduism versus secularism was not altogether that strong. One is, of course, the reason being that all the major parties are, one way or the other, leftist parties. Among the major parties, the rightmost party is the Democratic Socialist Party, and then, of course, beyond that are all, at least in name, communist parties. So while there are very, powerful individuals within these parties who are more Hindu than they would like to admit, their view did not prevail eventually. The only reason that it came up for any kind of contention was after the election of Modi in 2014. We're still in the constitution writing process. And there was a lot of apprehension about, what that would mean for the constitution writing process itself. So secularism was enshrined again in the constitution, although, it was secularism was defined to somehow mean Hinduism because of the use of the term Sanatan Dharma, which obviously can be argued to mean religion handed down from tradition. But we all know that's code for Hinduism. But apart from that, it is more or less, given that there will be some part of the political spectrum that will continue to argue for Hinduism, given that the proportion of Hindus is roughly the same as in India. So there will continue to be that. But then it is in the whole question of constitution drafting, it was federalism and the form of federalism that was the most important discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Manjita?
I think you had more of suggestions for me, so I'll just say the work on it.
Question, please.
Yeah.
Can I start?
No, please. Please wait, Ramesh. So any other question from the floor, please, for Manjita? No, Manjita, we are running short of time. That may be one of the reasons why others don't want to ask questions now. So if you would like to make comment, otherwise we can.
So, yeah, that's okay. I've noted down what you said.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Manjita. So over to Ramesh.
Yeah. So due to time constraints, I will be brief. Actually, when it comes to economic alternatives, actually much has been written on these economic alternatives for the plantation Tamils in Sri Lanka. That's why I did not touch that aspect. But still, as you actually suggested me to look at that aspect, I can say a couple of things about these economic alternatives. They do not have land rights. That is a major problem. So due to absence of land rights, they are unable to claim any economic alternatives in this country. So therefore now what they are doing is that they are mobilized through civil society organizations, and they are mobilized through trade unions, and continuously demanding over the last 10 15 years, they have been continuously demanding for land rights. So by securing the land rights, they can go for some kind of alternative economic options in the future. That is the only option they have currently in Sri Lanka. And the second thing is the actual forms of protest. They are largely using trade unions and the civil society movements to show their protest and agitation to the government of Sri Lanka for the continuing discriminations and other forms of institutional exclusions that are taking place for centuries. So that is one part of showing their protest. And second strategy is that they have political leaders, elected political leaders at the local level and the national level. So they are pushing their political leaders, and they are pressuring their political leaders to take up their issues at the legislative parliament and other policy making bodies to bring out positive policies which could possibly ensure equality and non-discrimination in Sri Lanka. So that is the kind of actual protest that they are perceiving. And also they are politicians. The politicians, those who represent this community, have been employing the patron clientelism to get some public services to this community. So that is the only option they have. So because the state is very much discriminatory, policies and institutions are discriminatory. So they are involved in this patron clientelistic approach they are using to support this. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So thank you very much once again for the entire team.
Yeah. So all presentations were excellent, I must say. I'm so thankful to each and every one of you. Over to you, Professor Indrajit.
I think this is Buddha's turn now to take it forward. Buddha.
Yeah, but someone has stopped my video thing. Anyway, so it's just a closing remark. Again, this session was another excellent session, like the very first session, and the papers presented by Abeeda Qureshi, and then Deepak Thapa, and then Manjita Devi and Ramesh Ramasamy. These papers are just excellent, and thank you all, and also thank you, Dr. Ravi Raman, for the moderating the session. All participants, thank you all. Again, like you are from different countries, from Australia, Sri Lanka, India, Germany, UK, and also from Bangladesh. Now we will take a lunch break for an hour, and we'll be back with our keynote session that will start at 1:30. And the keynote will be delivered by Professor Faisal Debsi, Professor of Indian History, St. Antony's College, University of Oxford, UK. And also in between, we'll play 2 documentary films during our lunch break. Please stay with us. And once again, thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Buddha.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to chime in my thanks as well. You know, so many of you showed so much interest, and so we're very grateful. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.